Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is God's greatest gift towards man. I mean every word of it. What started off as a one-off parody comic by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird soon became one of the most widely recognized franchises of all time, spawning a vast number of toys, movies, comics, and TV series that began with the 80s cartoon and continues to be rebooted till this day. But while the toned-down, friendlier 1987 cartoon served as most people's introduction to the series, me, being a 2000s kid, was introduced to the world of the Turtles in a different way. You see, back when I was a kid, we still had this thing on non-cable channels called Saturday morning cartoons. At first, there were many blocks. Kids WB was always my favorite, but I do remember watching ABC Kids, and more importantly for the sake of this video, the Fox Box.
It's the Fox Box! Non-stop action, out-of-this-world adventures, and crazy comedy! What's inside the Fox Box?
Speaking of which, what exactly was in the Fox Box? Did we ever find that out?
What's in the box? What's in the fucking box?
Pain.
The Fox Box was a channel that would go through several changes over the years, being rebranded as the infamous 4Kids TV in 2005, and then merging with Kids WB to become the CW 4Kids in 2008. It was like all the streaming mergers we have now, but before the age of streaming. The majority of 4Kids programming consisted of English-dubbed anime, although they did occasionally dabble in tokusatsu shows. Their dubs weren't entirely bad.
Stick around if you want to. See if I care.
I love a girl who treats me like dirt.
They were a bit weird and were often ridiculed for the insane amounts of censorship put into them. Japanese television aside, occasionally 4Kids would help create original programming, and one of the most successful shows that they had a hand in was the 2003 adaptation of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. 4Kids' version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was part of a partnership between them and Mirage Studios, the company founded by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. The animation itself was done by Dongwoo, a South Korean animation studio. Hooray for cheap labor. Also, this show looks way too good for that not to be the case. I mean, do you think Americans could do this? The show aired from February 2003 all the way to February 2009 with a total of 7 seasons. Throughout its 6-year run, it went through many changes, for the same reasons that any other show would really. I mean, you gotta keep those ratings high. The show's 7 seasons are all part of one continuous continuity, but the way I see it, the show is easiest to discuss if you split it up into 4 separate sections, consisting of seasons 1 through 4, fast forward, Season 5, also known as The Lost Episodes, and Back to the Sewer. Although, if you are willing to include the 2009 TV movie Turtles Forever, that would make it 5 separate segments. My plan is to begin a series of videos where I cover each unique section of 4Kids Ninja Turtles, taking a look at the overall storyline, episodes that stood out to me, and just generally sharing any likes or dislikes with you, the audience, the special people. And with that said, I have decided to start off the first video by discussing the original 4 seasons of the show. Now before I delve too deep into this, let me address the elephant in the room. So there's this guy on YouTube named J Reviews, who recently released a retrospective series of videos that covers the whole series and seems to be pretty popular. His first video got uploaded right around the time I started rewatching the show, and I began to second guess if I should even go through with this series of videos at all. But then I figured, what the shell? As long as I make it my own thing with my own opinions, then I should be fine. Plus, I'm sure there's plenty of other videos covering the show on YouTube anyway. I made sure to avoid watching any reviews of the series beforehand, so if I say something that someone else has already said, it'll be sheer coincidence. But what was it about this series, specifically the first 4 seasons, that made me fall in love with this show? Well, to find that out, it's best I give a brief description of what differentiated this show from any of its predecessors. Before the existence of the 4Kids Turtles, there was not one, but 2 Ninja Turtle TV shows. the original beloved 1987 cartoon, and whatever the hell Next Mutation was. There was also Mutant Turtles Superman Legend, but that's so deep cut I think it's best we never speak of this again. They have eyes everywhere. What 4Kids Ninja Turtles did so differently and uniquely is it actually adapted the comics faithfully while still maintaining a mostly kid-friendly tone. Emphasis on mostly, I'll get to that in a bit. Plenty of material from the first few seasons are lifted directly from the comics, most notable being the very first scene, which is a word-for-word recreation of the opening panels of the original comic that does an excellent job at setting up the grittier tone you can expect from this series.
Nobody messes with the purple dragons, especially wearing stupid turtle costumes. He's wrong. We're not wearing costumes.
Stylistically, the series has a less toony look to it than its predecessor. It's far more comic booky without resembling the Eastman and Laird comics. It really is its own beast, and this show has some incredible designs as well. The turtles themselves all have slightly different shades of green, which I always thought to be a neat addition. This is something they'd expand upon in later shows, taking it one step further and changing their body types as well. The shading in this show is nuts, and one of the things that I feel really makes it stand out from other cartoons. Like, even without the excessive shading, this show would still have looked really nice, but the animators really delivered in making this show look as badass as they possibly could. The animation is real smooth as well. There's rarely any awkward moments where the illusion is ruined, and you can tell that a lot of thought was put into the fight choreography to keep it as action-packed as possible. But let's talk about the turtles themselves, the heroes in the half shell. Whatever the hell, the shell that means. For this, a lot of inspiration was taken from previous incarnations to form their personalities, with a few adjustments. Leonardo, voiced by Michael Sinterniklaas, is still the leader of the group, and no, partners in crime did not have a clue. He's the leader of the group. This time, Leonardo is treated as a character that carries a lot of weight on his shoulders, always having to be the responsible one. It's an aspect to his character they'd only further explore as the series progressed, and what I think makes him one of the most interesting characters. As a kid, Raph was always my favorite, but as an adult, I have a respect for this type of character that I never gave much thought to back then.
Raph, no! I gave her my word of honor!
Donatello is one of the characters with the least changes, remaining the smart one, or as the 80s series so gracefully put it, Donatello does machines! That's a fact, Jack! He's voiced by Sam Ridgel, and the most fun aspect of his character is just seeing him get excited over nerd stuff that no one else gives a shit about.
How do we stop something we can't see?
Already got that one covered. Turtle Vision Heat Sensor Goggles.
There's probably a few too many English Einstein moments, but what are you gonna do? It's an early 2000s kids show. I may be alone in this, but I actually feel that Sam Riegel and Michael Sinterniklaas have a very similar voice. It took me a while to get used to it, but there were a few moments where I'd confuse the two if I couldn't see their lips moving. Raphael has changed the most drastically from the 80s cartoon, adopting the angry, hot-headed personality of the early comics and 90s movie, rather than the more sarcastic personality he had in the 80s cartoon.
Wow, that was a short trip.
He's voiced by Greg Abbey, who does a terrific Brooklyn accent. He's the type of guy who would say some stereotypical nonsense like, "I'm walking here."
Piece of cake! Don't be so sure. Phone boy called for backup.
I actually love these changes to Raphael. It works really well for the grittier tone of this show and gives him more of an arc, with him having to overcome this anger, similar to the way that Leonardo has to carry the weight of responsibility. And then there's Michelangelo, the party dude, voiced by Wayne Grayson. That's him, he's certainly the party dude and the main source of comic relief for this show. He has his moments where he can be a bit annoying, but that's all part of his character and one of those things I grew pretty accustomed to, so I'm willing to let it slide.
Was that a good or bad Cause this is the part in the movie where we should be looking for the monster's one weakness so we can kiss our shells goodbye. Trust me, you don't want to underestimate a monster!
Throughout the show, there's this running theme of brotherhood that I feel the more serious tone allows them to really delve into. Their brotherly dynamic is really a highlight of the show, even if most of that is shown through quippy dialogue that gives the MCU a run for its money.
It's garbage day, fat man. Time to take your can out to the curb.
What?
How about time to dump you in the dumpster, smelly boy?
I'll admit it, I am the type of person that complains often about the quippy humor in those movies, but it doesn't bother me here, I think for two reasons. One, there's that brotherly connection that makes it feel more believable here, and two, this is a Y7 kids cartoon, not a PG-13 movie. Splinter in this series is voiced by Darren Dunstan, doing a very stereotypical Japanese sensei voice. If this were made today, I'd say this were borderline racist.
Ow! Ow! Hey!
What was that for? For being so foolish. You should never have tried to face the Shredder alone.
His origin here is closer to the comics, with rather than him being Hamato Yoshi, he was Hamato Yoshi's pet rat, who got changed into a mutant the same way that his sons did. Now this, in some ways, makes more sense, but in other ways, it's kinda dumb. I know expecting Ninja Turtles to be more realistic is insane, but for some reason the hardest thing for me to buy in the entirety of this show is the idea that a rat learned karate from his owner. I think in other series where he is Hamato Yoshi, it makes his rivalry with Orokusaki more meaningful. At least from the Shredder's standpoint, it's kind of weird for the Shredder to lust after revenge on a former foe's pet of all things. In this series, Splinter is a bit more strict, and there's a real emphasis on the idea that Splinter trained the Turtles to be ninja assassins, which is pretty fucked, but for some reason never really addressed as it should be. You could assume that Splinter just trained them to be ninjas in order to protect them from the outside world, and that all of that Shredder stuff was just sheer coincidence. But I refuse to believe that. I think it's far more likely he was using the Turtles for revenge and just happened to grow a fatherly bond with them. The show isn't just about mutants though, there's some great human characters as well, the two main ones being April O'Neil and Casey Jones. April isn't a reporter here, rather she's a girl that owns a china shop who just happens to get involved with the Turtles.
Hey, so, can I keep her?
Did I mention there's a lot of 90s movie references? Because there is a lot of 90s movie references in the first season.
Can we keep her?
April is voiced by Veronica Taylor, and she's introduced to the story in the same way she was in the comics, with the whole Baxter Stockman Mauser storyline. She's just the type of character who is always willing to help the Turtles out, and I like the way her and Donnie connect over science jargon. You can tell her bond with Donnie is closer than with any other turtle, something that would be further explored in the 2012 show. But perhaps my favorite character in this show would have to be Casey Jones, voiced by Mark Thompson.
No mercy, scum. I'm putting you punks out of business permanently.
Like Raph, he's a bit of a hothead, but with less intelligence. He's kind of this idiot vigilante who's just trying to clean up the city and has a blast doing it. Any episode with him tends to be a lot of fun. He just brings so much liveliness to the show, and I think the idea that he's far dumber than any of the mutant animal characters is pretty funny.
Give me a poster and give me that!
Plus, his iconic hockey mask and use of sports equipment as weapons is just the coolest. He's the type of character that makes me want to be a vigilante, so I can immediately get my ass kicked and end up in the ER. Seeing him team up with Raph is a highlight as well. The two characters have such good chemistry, and the series never feels like it has to really work towards that. They just play off of each other really well. Both April and Casey also have their own backstories. April with her Uncle Augie going missing, and Casey with his beef with the Purple Dragons.
They were purple dragons.
We didn't pay.
They torched our store.
It's all stuff that gets addressed more as the show advances, but it adds a lot more to each of these characters. But Ninja Turtles isn't just about the heroes, it's also a show with an impressive rogues gallery that I feel this show excellently utilizes. There are villains here, both new and old, many of them taken from the comics. One such character who I really love is Baxter Stockman, a mad scientist with a massive ego who is always going off about how clever he is. He's voiced by Scott Williams and is probably the villain with the most screen time. He goes through a lot of changes both mentally and physically throughout the series, mainly due to his limbs being severed by the Shredder, but we're not quite there yet, people. We've got some more ground to cover first. Another great recurring villain was Hun, a new addition to the series and a leader of the Purple Dragons, a gang of thugs with ties to the Foot Clan, the Shredder's ninja army. Hun's main characteristic, besides being big and strong, consists of being incredibly loyal to the Shredder. He could have just been a simple goon, but the writers did an excellent job at making him more interesting than that. There's a nice contrast between him and Stockman when it comes to following the Shredder's orders. You've got one henchman always looking out for himself, and another who would do anything to please his master.
Perhaps you'd like to explain this plan to the master.
Let me go, you brainless, muscle-bound idiot!
He was actually voiced by two separate actors, David Zen Mansley and Greg Carey. As to when the change in voice was made, I do not know, as I honestly never picked up on that. It's possible the change doesn't come until Back to the Sewer, but I would have to wait and see till I watch it again. And of course, there are a vast variety of other baddies, but I'll wait on that, as I would first like to focus on the biggest bad of them all, and one of my all-time favorite villains, the 2003 incarnation of the Shredder.
Prepare to face your destiny and your doom.
Y'all remember Shredder in the 80s, right? I mean, a total loser.
Get that thing out of my face, you idiot!
Well, this Shredder is like if someone went, what if he was cool, and made the necessary changes. It's not even the badass silver armor or the piercing eyes, but it's that voice that'll send a chill down your spine every time he speaks.
Those who are not with me are against me. And I crush anyone who stands against me.
He's voiced by Scotty Ray, and I don't think a Shredder's voice will ever come close to this again. There is one small aspect to his presence, though, that's more than likely meant to be taken seriously, but makes me laugh every time. It's the fact that every time he enters a room, they play this sound effect. After doing exactly 5.5 seconds of research, I discovered that the sound is actually the kabuki keiko, a shout used in Japanese music, kabuki theater, and certain martial arts. It's just funny the sheer amount of use they get out of this one sound. The Shredder has a lot more to him than meets the eye. You will learn in later episodes that he's actually not even human, but an Utrom alien named Shrell that crashed on Earth centuries ago and has been making a name for himself in Japan ever since. And now New York, I guess. You'd think revealing he was actually a little pink alien would make him less of a threat, and maybe in some ways it does, but I for one am a huge fan of Alien Shredder. I think the way in which the Utroms are incorporated in the show is done exceptionally well, and I love the thought that the most threatening version of this character is actually just a little guy. Him being an alien also allowed them to get away with some darker imagery in the first season, the main example being Leo slicing off his head. Not being aware of that yet, I remember this being the most awesome thing as a kid, even if the reveal comes shortly after. Although him being an alien does raise a few questions. Most importantly, there's an episode early on in which the Turtles are fighting mutant clones of the Shredder, and the mutant clones, well, they're very much not Utroms. After this episode, they're just never addressed again, so I'm not really sure if they had the Shredder being an Utrom stuff planned out yet, or if it was still in the early stages, or maybe they were just someone else's clones. Who really knows? Who cares? Another aspect of the Shredder that I really love is how he feels so eternal. He's like a slasher villain. No matter how many times you defeat him, he'll always come back. He's not just a single entity, he's an idea. Well, now that we've covered all of the major characters, it's time we move on and start talking about the show itself, starting with the very first season. Season 1 of the show serves as an excellent introduction to Ninja Turtles, as it was my personal introduction. Season 1 is the season that adapts the most straight from the comics. It feels to me like Mirage must have worked closely with the writers, as it manages to stay accurate while finding enough ways to keep the younger crowd entertained. As mentioned before, a lot of that is through quippy dialogue, and then there's Mikey being, well, Mikey.
Thanks, guys. I owe you. We take cash, personal checks, and most major credit cards.
Each episode starts with a "you're probably wondering how I got here" type monologue that just throws you into the center of the story.
Ever see one of those old movies where the private eye wakes up after being knocked out cold? He always says the same thing. Oh, where am I?
This is of course a way to inform viewers that something will indeed happen in these episodes. So please don't turn the channel. Sometimes these monologues work really well. Other times I feel like they're a bit too spoilery. Like, I know it's a show for kids, but I would have liked to be a bit more surprised by some of the episodes, but maybe that's just my adult brain overthinking it. Being a 4-kid show, there are certain things that they had to exclude for the younger viewers. One of the most notable to me being the use of the word shell in place of hell, which would be fine if it was used sparingly, but by God, do they overuse it?
What the shell are those things? What the shell?
Ah, shell.
It's like the writers thought it was the coolest thing, but it's so bad, especially considering they make a few jokes poking fun at the word cowabunga.
What? At least it ain't cowabunga.
And it's just like,
You guys, knock it off.
There's also an aspect of censorship that didn't allow anyone to use the words die or dead. More often than not, you'll hear the use of defeated or gone, which is dumb, but hey, kids show.
He gave his life to save ours.
Actually, that statement would be in error, Donatello.
Most of season 1 revolves around the discovery that there's a ninja clan in New York, and how all of that ties to the Shredder and Splinter's past. But that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of standalone episodes as well. I'd say it's pretty much 50-50 with the first season, with the other half of it being these multi-part story-driven episodes that help further the show's overall plot. But besides being mostly an introduction to these heroes and villains, there's a few noteworthy standalone episodes that I feel are very well worth pointing out. One of which is called Nano, and follows a robot with a childlike mind who confuses a criminal for his daddy and starts committing crimes for him. The episode itself is perfectly fine, with the Turtles trying their best to put a stop to Nano, but things really take a turn for the worse when, instead of helping him in any way, the Turtles end up setting him on fire and knocking him into a trash compactor.
No! No!
Jesus. It's just a truly fucked up moment that's horrifying to watch. This episode isn't exactly important to the rest of the story, but it does set up exactly the kind of dark nonsense you'll occasionally see with the show. It also sets up one of many recurring villains in Nano. There's a lot of villains in the show that are by no means primary antagonists, but they do appear more than once. Some stories are introduced in season 1 that won't get a satisfying conclusion until later seasons, one of these being the 3-part story Tales from the Underground, in which the Turtles travel far underground to discover an abandoned genetics lab run by the Foot and are attacked by a group of intelligent monsters who were once humans. By the end of the story, they manage to turn the creatures back into humans, but they are still unable to live on the surface, as they must rely on the power of a giant ancient crystal located in an underground city in order to remain human. This would be resolved in a later episode, and I do like how there are these little recurring plots in the show that aren't quite as grand as the stuff with the Shredder, but still feels important.
What's wrong?
I'd forgotten how beautiful it was.
Which brings me to one aspect of the show that I really love about the first few seasons. For most 20-minute shows, you'd have a 2-part episode every once in a while. But here we're getting treated to a lot of 3 to 4-part episodes, sometimes even 5, which gives the show a more cinematic feel. It's like you're watching a full movie, like some grand epic by Saturday morning cartoon standards. This was also at a time when it was rare for Western cartoons to do this. Nowadays, it seems every cartoon for kids has a big overarching story, but Ninja Turtles was definitely ahead of its time when it came to that department. Another standalone episode that stood out to me was The King, an episode in which Donatello meets Jack Kirby, whose drawings are coming to life.
It wasn't really me. I mean, I can draw, sure. Been doing it for years, but it's this crystal. It supplies the magic.
Okay, they never actually refer to him as Jack, only Kirby, but we all know it's him. This episode is adapted directly from the 1986 comic Donatello microseries, and is just a love letter to the amazing comic book work of Jack Kirby. And as a big fan of comics, I find it really neat to see a piece of comic book fiction that addresses the people responsible for it. Speaking of Jack Kirby, there are superheroes in this show, which shouldn't be that surprising. The Ninja Turtles have crossed over with them in the comics, but what makes it so bizarre is that they rarely ever address their existence. Silver Sentry is the main hero, who is basically Black Superman.
Look at me. I'm Black Superman.
He's an alright character, but it's just strange to think that there's a superhero protecting New York City when more often than not, it's the Turtles having to save the day with no hero in sight. I really think it's just a case of the writers wanting to incorporate superheroes into it, so they just went ahead and did it. I mean, why not? Kids won't be thinking about the logistics of it. Plus, there's the Season 2 episode with a team of elderly superheroes called the Justice Force, but they act like it's surprising that they're real, so I don't know what that's about.
Then the Justice Force is real?
Real as this steel saucer on my noggin.
That aside, Silver Sentry's existence results in a fun episode where Mikey decides to become a hero known as the Turtle Titan. I like the episode quite a bit, but I do have to ask whose idea it was to give Mikey a red cowl and cape over an orange one, because that honestly really bugs me. There's nothing in particular about this show in its early seasons that makes it feel outdated, unless you want to count the overabundance of Matrix references.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Neo. Leo. Wait a minute. A bow staff and a crowd of guys who all look the same? Time to try out one of my favorite movie stunts. Looks like it's time to rage against the machine. Come on!
There are times they become more than just references and take on a life of their own. The Guardians are a good example of this. Mysterious dudes who occasionally appear throughout the show wearing black trench coats and sunglasses. The inspiration is clear as day. It's honestly surprising we never got a Matrix cartoon of any kind besides the obvious. But if we did, I imagine the characters would look something like this. Season 1 focuses most of its time on the Turtles battling it out with the Shredder and his foot ninjas, but around the end of the season, Splinter goes missing and the Turtles are trying to figure out exactly where he went.
I'm done coming home empty-handed. We find Splinter tonight!
They end up tracking him to the TCRI building, the same company responsible for the ooze that transformed them into mutants, where it's revealed that the workers are actually Utroms, which leads to the four brothers accidentally being transported to a place where only the bold go.
Space!
Now, before I get into Season 2, I'd actually like to talk about a very important aspect of the show that I seem to have missed, and that is the show's kick-ass intro.
Turtles, count it off! Live by the code of the martial arts. Never fight unless someone else starts.
The opening song is composed by Norman J. Grossfeld and Russell Velazquez, and while it's not quite as iconic as the original 80s intro, it's still a true banger. I also love that there's an actual, fully animated intro as opposed to just using clips from the show. It's also a lot of fun seeing the ways that they change it up with each new season.
Watch out for Shredder!
We shredded Shredder!
I kind of wish more Ninja Turtle adaptations were willing to do their own original intros. It seems that since Viacom acquired them, they've just been using new iterations of the 80s theme, which is fine, I guess, but I want new, unique songs that complements the tone of each new series. Anyway, back to the Turtles being in space. This is one aspect of the show that I definitely misremembered. I always thought the space episodes came later, like in season 3, but I was around the age of 7 when I initially watched this season, so it's no surprise that my memory would be a bit jumbled. Although it should be noted that only the first 5 episodes of Season 2 take place in space, most of Season 2 takes place on Earth, but their adventures in space would have a dramatic effect on the rest of the story. Season 2 also brings more familiar faces into the crowd, like the Triceratons, a once honorable race of dinosaur-like aliens that has been at war with the Federation for an unknown length of time. The Turtles in Space arc also introduces the presence of Professor Honeycutt, otherwise known as the Fugitoid. The deal with the Fugitoid is that he was a professor who had his mind transferred into a robot and is the only one with the knowledge of how to build the Teleportal, a device wanted by the Federation to be used as a weapon in their war against the Triceraton army. Honeycutt refuses to build it and ends up a fugitive on the run, who the Turtles happen to get involved with and must protect. It was at this point I realized just how much like a comic book this show truly felt, with the way it was able to so quickly jump from one arc to the next without it ever feeling too rushed. It's a lot happening at once, but it all progresses in a way that feels natural. Believe it or not, the show is actually a lot slower paced in comparison to the original comics, which is hard to believe. As soon as the Turtles get back to Earth, they manage to reunite with Splinter, who was nursed back to health by the Utroms, who, as it turns out, were the good guys all along. I'd also like to take a moment to say the Utroms are adorable. I love these little guys.
Careful with your weapons discharge. We cannot afford to damage the techno-organic equipment in this chamber.
There is one exception though, and that being Shredder, whose backstory is told via augmented reality. And of course, the head of Baxter Stockman manages to pull some wires from the AR device, causing it to become real. Okay, I guess. This is probably a good time to mention that until this point, the Shredder had been tearing Stockman apart limb by limb every time one of his inventions failed him. It goes so far in the later episodes to the point where Stockman is just a floating brain in a jar with a single eyeball, which I find to be darkly comedic. But you've got to ask yourself why Stockman is really the only one he does this to. It's a bit weird that Shredder never tortures any other henchmen in such a brutal manner.
For every punishment you inflicted upon me, I will make you suffer tenfold. You will finally learn to respect my superior intellect.
Season 2, Episode 9 is a clip show episode. The episode The Ultimate Ninja introduces interdimensional travel into the mix. This will come into play towards the end of the season, but not until after the introduction of the iconic Leatherhead, a large mutant crocodile with brains similar to that of Donatello. Only real difference is he has trouble keeping his rage in check. He has his moments, but watching the show now, I can see he is a much wimpier character than I remember. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think the version of the character I had in my head as a kid was much cooler.
I'm a monster. I am a monster!
We also get to see the Turtles return to the underground city to help out Quarry and the gang again, and it's nice to see some resolution to the plotline. I was a bit worried that they'd drag out the story until the show got cancelled, leaving us with no satisfying conclusion. Season 2, episodes 14 through 16, also known as City at War, is a nice turn of events for the series. Although to my understanding, this is a very loose interpretation of a much bigger event from the comics. City at War takes place after Shredder's defeat, with the Foot Clan, the Purple Dragons, and the city's mobsters all at odds with one another, and the Turtles feeling that, by defeating the Shredder, they've only made things worse. This also serves as the introduction to Karai, Shredder's daughter, who I believe to be one of Ninja Turtles' most intriguing characters. She's an honorable warrior trained in the arts of ninjutsu by her father and plays the role of both ally and antagonist throughout the series, but also believes in honor, which the Shredder clearly does not. It's a very real character that reminds me of the very real people who will share their parents' beliefs simply because they think they owe it to them for raising them. She adds a lot to the series, and it's always a treat to see her return in later episodes. Occasionally, for certain episodes, such as City at War, the show will use these really cheesy songs created by, to my understanding, an unnamed band.
Darkness falls and the city calls. They wouldn't have it any other way.
I don't know whether I love them or hate them. They certainly were a choice.
It's a jungle out there.
The last big story in Season 2 is a 4-parter called The Big Brawl. This is where the interdimensional stuff comes into play again, with a big tournament known as the Battle Nexus being held by the Daimyo, an old friend of Splinter and a great warrior who invented the art of ninjutsu. His son Ui, which I'm probably saying wrong, also happens to be an A-grade asshole who causes a lot of trouble for the Turtles. But who cares about that? We have a tournament to get to.
First tier, begin!
If I'm gonna be completely honest, I'm not as big a fan of tournament arcs as some other people may be. The best thing I can say about this arc is that it's fairly short, unlike what you'd see in animes like Dragon Ball. It also introduces the greatest character ever to cross over with the Turtles, Miyamoto Usagi. I think all Turtles fans are well aware of Miyamoto Usagi, but if not, he originates from a comic series called Usagi Yojimbo, which I highly recommend. He tends to cross over with the Ninja Turtles a lot, so despite not originating as a TMNT character, he's often considered such. After Leonardo is poisoned during the tournament, Usagi and the Turtles discover that Ui and an old enemy of Splinter's named Draco have teamed up with a sinister plan to dethrone the Daimyo and take over the multiverse. It doesn't go exactly as planned though, as the story concludes with the two of them being sucked into a rift in time and space. The tournament itself ends with Mikey winning on a technicality and being crowned Battle Nexus champion. This is precisely why my headcanon will always be that Mikey is the strongest turtle. I mean, think of it. Raph beats Leo in the 2007 movie, Mikey beats Raph in the tournament, Donatello is Donatello.
I'm the first turtle eliminated? The guys won't ever let me live this down.
It just makes sense. Season 3 would be a bit of a departure from the plot-centric episodes of Season 1 and 2, but that doesn't mean that there isn't any plot, as the first 6 episodes are full of it, revolving around the Federation and Triceratons traveling to Earth in search of the Fugitoid. At first they're mistaken, but then it turns out that the Fugitoid really is on Earth. This also serves as the introduction to Agent Bishop, a new recurring villain and one of the Turtles' most menacing foes. Bishop is a government agent with an extreme fascination with the dissection of aliens and mutants. He's a skilled fighter who makes for a rather cunning antagonist. He's only second to the Shredder, really. Funny enough, for some reason my baby brain seemed to remember Bishop as a character who started off evil and turned into an ally at a later point, but I'm starting to wonder if I just confused that with the Bishop from the 2012 show. The arc ends with Professor Honeycutt sacrificing his life in order to defeat the Triceraton and Federation army, allegedly. You'll find out later in the season that he's A-OK, just trapped inside Donatello's tech, a fate worse than death. Now that the space plotline is resolved, much of the season is standalone episodes, most of which are pretty good. It's not till around Season 3, Episode 17 that the story picks up again, with the Turtles encountering a time-traveling apprentice named Renette, a character fans of the comics will more than likely be familiar with, and might I say, a much slimmer version of her at that. There's also no Cerberus present this time around for reasons. I say good riddance. I hope he burns in hell. Renette is a character who's a bit of a dumbass and often ambivalent to the troubles that she puts the Turtles through.
Stupid thing! How come you're not working? Can't you guys, be a little quieter?
concentrate.
She's a fun character. I like the idea of someone so irresponsible having complete control over time and space. Her episode results in the reveal that Draco and Ui are still alive, but now fused together because time and space is a scary thing. The two of them manage to get their hands on the Time Scepter, which comes back to haunt the Turtles 2 episodes later, when he appears in their lair and sends each of them to their own alternate reality. The next few episodes are a lot of fun. Michelangelo gets to hang out with turtle superheroes, Raph gets to compete in a death race, Leo gets to visit Japan, and Donnie...
Donnie, Mikey, no!
You know what? Let's just talk about this. Same As It Never Was is something of an iconic episode of the series. I think it's because it fully commits to that darker tone that the show would occasionally delve into. In this episode, Donnie gets transported to a future where the Shredder has completely taken over the world and his brothers have separated after he went missing for a very long time. Mikey is missing an arm, Leo is completely blind, and Raph's only missing one eye. He got off lucky. I can only assume that Raph's case was a reference to that time he melted half his face off. The Image Comics Ninja Turtles were weird. I really love the Shredder's design in this episode. The big robotic body just seemed like something that character designers had a lot of fun with. I do agree with people who say this is one of the best episodes. I know it's an idea that other media has done before, but these types of episodes are always fun because it allows them to be as bleak as possible. Because hey, it didn't actually happen, so it's all okay. It also gives you more of an in-depth look at the characters and how such unfortunate events would affect each of them individually.
I don't know what happened to you guys, but the Turtles I knew believed that nothing was ever hopeless. Please, we can do this!
As already mentioned, Leo's adventure sees him transported to feudal Japan, where he meets fan favorite Miyamoto Usagi once again. Their story ends with Draco and the Daimyo-san being turned to dust, and Lord Simultaneous returning to retrieve the Time Scepter. He then restores the Daimyo-san back to a younger version of himself.
I had the most horrible nightmare! Oh, Father!
My son? Oh, my son! Do not cry. I too had a horrible nightmare, but it is over now. It's all right. It's all going to be all right.
How funny would it be if he just turned evil again? Despite a lot of filler, Season 3 happens to end on what is probably the series' biggest event thus far, with the two-part special Exodus, which feels like a culmination of everything that has led up to this point. The episode revolves around Shredder planning to launch a ship into space as part of a plan to conquer other planets, which is really funny when you think about it, the idea that the Shredder has pretty much just given up on conquering Earth because a bunch of turtles that he didn't take into account just won't leave him alone. A lot of past heroes and villains team up for this episode, and most of it is just one big fight. I didn't even mention the fight scenes in this show, which are pretty great and always manage to keep me invested. I think these two episodes have some of the best fight scenes, as the entire premise revolves around them just trying to stop the Shredder from getting on a ship. It's so simple, yet feels so grand in scale. This is also the episode where Hun discovers that Shredder's an Utrom, and it's a lot of fun just watching his perception of this guy that he's sworn leadership to crumble before his eyes in a single moment.
Sir, you're an Utrom?
This would become a whole thing in Season 4 with him feeling like the Shredder lied to him and becoming his own crime lord of sorts with the Purple Dragons. But that does raise a few questions regarding Same As It Never Was. I mean, in that, the Shredder is clearly an Utrom and Hun's still loyal to him.
Master, please take me back. What? I'll serve you. Please.
But I guess you could just say that it was an alternate reality and then it all kind of makes sense. Exodus Part 2 ends with the Utrom High Council putting the Shredder to trial and sentencing him to an eternity on an ice asteroid. A fate worse than being trapped in Donnie's tech. And thus, the Shredder is finally defeated. Or is he?
Watch out for Shredder!
I found it to be a pretty satisfying ending for the Shredder story, at least to me. It's a bit of a deus ex machina, but it's nice to see the Shredder testify for all his crimes and finally get the punishment that he probably deserved. If the show wanted to end here, I would have been pretty satisfied, but what follows is the fourth and final season I will be covering in this video. It also might be my favorite season so far in this rewatch. Season 4 is definitely the most episodic of the bunch. I see it as the aftermath season, where so much of it is dedicated to trying to tie up any loose ends that the previous seasons might have left unexplored. It's also the darkest season, with a lot of moments that will make you ask, why would they do that? Leonardo goes through the most changes here, with him feeling like a failure after almost losing his brothers to the Shredder. He loses focus and becomes an angry, vengeful type, much like Raph, only worse.
I couldn't protect my brothers, my master. I feel like such a complete failure. And no matter how I try to rationalize it, justify it, it always comes down to the fact that I wasn't good enough.
And Edgy Leo was a fun change of pace, and I find the deeper tone of voice he started to use to be pretty humorous, but in a good way. I'll gladly embrace Edgy Leo.
He's mine, Leo!
I'll just soften him up a little for you.
In Season 4, Episode 4 or 5, I honestly don't know. The episode numbers get all screwy by this point. Is called Dragon's Brew and is a great example of an episode that's just dark and depressing for absolutely no reason. In this episode, Hun and his posse of purple dragons steal a government shipping container, only to discover it's holding back a test subject that Bishop had kidnapped and transformed into a vicious mutant monster, 'cause that's just the kind of sick nonsense that bad guys do. The monster occasionally has flashbacks of his past life and family, and if you think that's sad, this is how the episode ends.
Mommy, I was dreaming about Daddy. It was horrible.
It's okay. Daddy's in a better place, remember?
What the fuck, guys? Why would you end an episode like that? While much of the earlier episodes of this season are fixated on Leo's loss of control, the second half of Season 4 fully addresses this with Leo taking his edgy phase too far, hurting Master Splinter. He is then sent out to seek the Ancient One, an old ninjutsu master that tends to fart. A lot.
Nice one, eh?
Although they just kind of dropped that after his first episode. Eventually, this leads to the reveal that Karai has taken up the mantle of Shredder as she attacks Splinter, Mikey, Dawn, and Raph, leading to Leonardo's heroic return to New York to save his family. Whether or not Karai's turn to Shredder was fully justified, I cannot say. It does feel like a lot of progress in her character development is undone, but I do like the idea of Karai as the Shredder, so I can't really complain too much. Agent Bishop gets a lot of focus in Season 4, for the most part replacing Shredder as the main antagonist. Much of his backstory is revealed here as we learn that he was once abducted by gray aliens and has been surviving for centuries via the use of clone bodies that he's able to transfer his mind into. Luckily, Baxter Stockman, who now works for him, is there to help and plans to use Bishop's technology to make a new body for himself. This eventually results in the episode Insane in the Membrane, the banned from TV episode. Ooh, scary. Well, at least in the US it was banned. Normally when an episode of a cartoon is banned, it's for really stupid reasons or something that might not be acceptable in another country. So being a 4-kids show, a company well known for censorship, I initially assumed that was the case when I first learned about it, but nope. The episode is legitimately disgusting, with Stockman's new body falling apart as he attempts to stitch himself back together, becoming a Frankenstein version of his former self. It's one of the few times I've looked at an episode that was banned and went, alright, that makes sense. But it's also unfortunate that it was, because of all the episodes of 2003 TMNT, this is among my favorite, and I think makes Stockman a lot more sympathetic than any of us had viewed him before this point. It's also extremely depressing for that very reason. These writers just like to see us suffer.
The sky was the limit. You were such a good boy. You had so much potential. What happened to you, baby doll?
Also, the decision to take Baxter Stockman, a character who had previously been known for turning into a fly in the 80s cartoon, and giving him a Cronenberg's The Fly-esque episode, was a neat idea and a fun spin on the character. I like it. This is the darkest the series ever got, and the darkest it would get, but it's definitely one worth seeking out now if you never got the chance to watch it as a kid. It did eventually air on TV through Nicktoons, which isn't really surprising considering that Nickelodeon censors are always asleep at the wheel. I mean, have you seen some of the stuff they get away with?
Now don't move it till I say.
In that sense, the band episode is no longer a band episode, and rather one that's quite easily accessible now. In Season 4, Episode 17, Outbreak, Bishop learns that a previous plan of his has led to a spread of goo that turns those who come in contact with it into mutant creatures. The mutant outbreak is a running plotline for a while that results in the Turtles becoming mutant hunters in an attempt to contain the outbreak. This also results in colorful new outfits and unique mutant hunting weapons that is very much an unsubtle gimmick to sell some toys. Or so I thought. I tried looking into it afterward to see if Playmates ever made any mutant hunting turtle figures, and as it turns out, they do not exist. I can only assume that these figures were planned at some point, but with the early release of Fast Forward, which we'll get into, the idea was shelved and just never came to be. Eventually, Donnie is exposed to the mutagen, with it mixing with his own DNA. Several episodes later, this event transforms him into a mutant himself, which he already was, but I'm talking big, savage mutant with no self-control.
Wow.
This results in the penultimate episodes of Season 4, Good Genes, in which the Turtles and Leatherhead make a deal with Bishop in order to cure Donnie. The intern animated this part. I like this arc because it emphasizes just how essential Donnie is to the rest of the team. It's pretty amusing seeing an intelligent Donnie be absent for a few episodes and the Turtles are just completely clueless as to what to do. I mean, you try creating a cure for a mutant monster. I'm sure I'd have given up immediately. After the mutant Donnie fiasco is resolved, the season ends on an episode in which the Turtles are abducted and brought to the Ninja Tribunal with 4 other captives. The Tribunal consists of 4 members with similar armor to that of the Shredder that sends them out on an unspecified assignment in Japan. And that's where we end for now. And some of you may be curious as to why we're stopping here, as the Turtles story is clearly not over yet, but there's a very good reason for that. Because while there is a 5th season of Ninja Turtles that follows the Ninja Tribunal arc, these episodes would not air until after the 2006 season and partial reboot, Fast Forward. This makes it debatable as to which seasons are actually 5 and 6, but chronologically it goes Ninja Tribunal arc and then Fast Forward. And that's if you consider the Tribunal stuff to be canon. Season 5 was actually finished before Fast Forward, but marketing executives thought it wise to release Fast Forward as early as possible to draw in more viewers. And by the time the Ninja Tribunal arc did air, they were referred to as the Lost Episodes, which was not entirely true, but hey, it's a neat little gimmick. So while Fast Forward did air before the Lost Episodes, I've decided to make my next video focus on the Ninja Tribunal arc, as I feel that's how the creators of the show intended it to be watched. With all that said, seasons 1 through 4 were excellent seasons of a truly great action cartoon, and from my memory, as good as the series got. I'd assume season 5 is really good too, but I'll have to finish rewatching it first. It's easy to see exactly why I loved this show as a kid and why it remains my favorite iteration of the Ninja Turtles. Thank you to everyone who took the time out of their busy day to take this trip down memory lane with me. I hope you'll stick around for the next part where I cover the Lost Episodes. I promise I'll try to make it fun. Goodbye.